Linux Luddites, episode 86, for the 5th of September, 2016. Hello and welcome to Linux Luddites, the show where we try all the latest free and open source software and then decide that we like the old stuff better. I'm Joe.
I'm Paddy.
And I'm Jesse. And on this show, we talk to Michael and Sujivan about UbuCon Europe. I give my first impression of the fish shell. We have your feedback, touch on topics such as the Lumina desktop and Gallium OS. And we're going to squeeze in some chatter about theme changes in Linux. But first, we must take a flutter around the feature-filled new FOSS facts of the fortnight, otherwise known as the news. Come on, first time. Let's move it.
All right, let's start then with the fact that the Linux kernel has turned 25. And if you remember the famous message that Linus posted saying it wasn't going to be big and professional like GNU, well, that has not really worked out for him, has it? Because it is incredibly professional. 92% of the people working on it are being paid to do so, are professionals, and it's only 7.7% of devs are unpaid. So that means that it is very professional. And I don't know, people say that as a bad thing, but to me, I don't think it is. I think it's good. I think that if people are being paid to do it, then it shows that it's worth something. And there's a reason why it's become ubiquitous across servers and embedded systems like Android. And so for me, I think it's good.
See, I took a different view on what he meant as professional there, because you're saying professional as in who's writing the code, and maybe from his point of view, that's the important part. But I saw it as professional as in the users, and as you touched on there, the fact that loads and loads of the servers run it, IoT, while maybe questionably professional, is a booming sort of industry. And the places that Linux is being used has not really just sort of broken ground on the desktop so well, but in so many professional areas, it really has. So again, that sort of means that what he first said 25 years ago has not come to light.
Yeah, but I think the year of the Linux desktop actually happened years and years ago, because I can remember professionals doing CAD and such like, actually using Spark stations and things like that back in the day. And it was only when PCs caught up with the processing power that they moved over to Windows. But
that's what I've never heard anyone say we've had the year of the Linux desktop.
Yeah, long gone, I'm afraid.
Oh, well, there's always Chrome OS.
Well, not if their new one comes into play. But yeah, putting that to one side.
And so LinuxCon is no more. From next year, it's going to be the Open Source Summit. And Paddy, you've written in the notes, what does this tell us? It tells us that it's not just about Linux. The Linux Foundation aren't just about Linux. They're about the wider FOSS ecosystem. And we've criticized them for not having the focus that perhaps they should before. So I suppose this is more of that from you then, Paddy.
Yeah, I was kind of hinting at that. And also the fact that it's the Open Source Summit. And obviously open source is a nice neutral term that people have worked hard to get out there. To take away a little bit from the GPL-ness of Linux, and we're going to come back to that later on.
Yeah, open source as opposed to free software. But that, again, ties in with the professionalism, doesn't it? Because free software was never... Well, corporate people don't like the word free, do they? Because of this curiosity of the English language of having free meaning two different things. Whereas open source, as you say, is far more neutral. It's far more corporate friendly.
Now, certainly reflected in the attendees at LinuxCon, wasn't it?
Yeah, so going back to the current time, if you will, at LinuxCon there was a keynote speech from Will Kokert, and he currently works for Microsoft, but has had a history in Linux, and so is another one of these people who, as Microsoft move towards, dare I say it, more of a Linuxy future or an open source future, they're bringing on these key people. And now, unfortunately, sort of his blog post about his keynote is absolutely riddled with sort of buzzword bingo and all these sort of, big terms and very Microsofty type stuff. But, touched on the fact that Microsoft has moved .NET Core and PowerShell and SQL Server over to Linux. They're looking at making the Microsoft Operations Management Suite usable on Linux to allow people to use that with Azure. And they admit that, 1 in 3 of their virtual machines on Azure are running Linux. And so it seems very odd, I think, at first glance to have a Microsoft representative at LinuxCon. But it does show, the number of things, and we've touched on it many times, about how many things Microsoft are doing these days, which are either focused on Linux or moving Microsoft products over to Linux.
I must admit, when I first saw the headline pop in my RSS feed, I wondered whether it was from Borat and was actually a comedy thing, because it's live from LinuxCon, sharing the latest news and learnings on Microsoft's Open Journey.
Yeah, learnings. Yeah, good word. And the photo of Linus and co standing in front of a Microsoft banner, and someone's holding a tux, an inflatable tux that is decidedly deflated. I think that picture's worth 1,000 words, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but elsewhere, there was some interesting correspondence going on. And on the mailing list for the upcoming Kernel Summit, Karen Sandler kicked things off by suggesting she make an appearance and start talking about GPL enforcement. And there was a mixed reaction, I think it's fair to say.
Mixed, yeah. Yeah, Linus wasn't very big on it, was he?
Well, he sort of backed up Greg KH, who basically said, well, I don't think we should have a lot of viewpoints from the litigation side of things, of trying to make sure the GPL is kept relevant by people suing other people. And so there's this fence got put up between those who thought that you should chase after people and enforce the GPL actively, and those who think that it should be used in a sort of more soft and communicative sort of way. On that side, as you said, Linus backed up Greg KH. Yeah,
both of them used fairly robust, I think is probably the word, language in their posts, a lot of which was directed towards the Software Freedom Conservancy's Bradley Coon.
Well, it's fairly obvious which side of the fence he's going to sit on.
It is. I think it was a really interesting thread, or there's actually about 3 threads there. You have to plough through them. It'll take you a good hour or so to do so. But if you're interested in FOSS, and I presume if you're listening to the show, then you're probably interested in licensing. And I think it's really worth the time to go through that whole thread and see people's opinions, because despite the robust language, it was an interesting conversation carried out generally in a good-natured way, but it really clarified things on where people sit. And as you suggested earlier, how the people working for the Linux Foundation tend to see things more corporately, if you like, and can see the benefits in a softly approach. And then you've got Bradley and Karen and people like Jeremy Allison and Matthew Garrett on the other side suggesting that perhaps a little bit more enforcement wouldn't be a bad thing.
Well, a balanced view that I took away from it is that you need to have litigation as a last resort. Otherwise, there's not much point having the GPL and the restrictions that you have with that. You may as well use a much more permissive license.
Freedoms.
Well, yeah, but if you're going to use the GPL, then you need to have the threat of enforcement. Yeah. Otherwise, what's the point of using it? And I think that that's fair enough. If you're not going to have lawsuits ever, then why bother with the GPL? Just let people use your code how they want and not feed the changes back in. So use MIT or BSD.
Yeah, and I think there was general agreement with that, even from Linus and Greg KH, that it should be seen as a resort, but definitely a last resort. And I think the phrase was nuclear option. But they both refused to sort of absolutely clarify where that line was.
But they didn't refuse to not have it at LinuxCon. So you know, the suggestion from Karen Sandler to have one of the speakers talk about enforcement of the GPL, notably absent from this year.
Well, let's stay with the kernel, but move in a somewhat different direction and talk about Android. And Android Nougat, the word that no one seems to be able to say properly, it's Nougat, not Nougat or anything like that. But anyway, has come out, and the Nexus 5 and the Nexus 7 2013 model have been abandoned. So we've all got one of these Nexus 7s, and so we're not getting Android 7.0 on it, which I'm not massively bothered about because I don't really like stock Android anyway. But it just goes to show that 2013, 2016, that's 3 years. That's not very good, is it? Mainstream support for a device. If that was a Windows PC that you'd bought 3 years ago and then you can't get Windows 10 on it, I think you'd be pretty annoyed. But for some reason, because it's got an ARM processor, we say, okay, right, I'll throw it away and buy another one then.
Yeah, I went and had a look at the Google website on this because I was aware there were short release cycles, but I wasn't aware of how short. And on there it says Nexus devices get Android version updates for at least 2 years from when the device first became available on the Play Store, and security patches for at least 3 years from when the device first became available, or at least 18 months from when the Google Store last sold the device, whichever is longer. And these are woefully short periods, I think.
I completely agree, but take the Nexus 7 2012 version. One of the main problems with that was that the hardware was not supported by the manufacturer. I can't remember, it was the processor or something. They just abandoned it. And so for Google to keep supporting it was basically impossible. And it's because, as I said, in the ARM world, things move more quickly. We're used to phones, people getting an upgrade every 2 years or 18 months or whatever, and then just abandoning their old phone because there's been such a huge step up every couple of years in the last, well, since Android came out. Every phone that's come out has been noticeably faster and better. And it's now that you can look at an Nexus 7 from 3 years ago and it's not that much slower than what you can buy now. We've got to this plateau, I think, where yes, you're getting more cores, you're getting more clock speeds, you are getting more performance, but it's not massive leaps like it used to be. And so people are now realizing that they don't need to upgrade their phone or their tablet. I mean, especially their tablet. And yet they're being forced to do so because the software is not available for it. Unless you go the custom ROM route, which is a tiny fraction of 1% of all of the phone and tablet users out there.
What if I shed a tiny slither of light on it? Because, I mean, yes, I agree when it comes to old phones, it's difficult because you have to keep them up to date. There are security problems with just walking around with phones, and they generally push over-the-air updates. But when it comes to a tablet, mine invariably doesn't leave my house. It's sat on my Wi-Fi behind a firewall. It's fairly, it's in a fairly safe little zone. And if the software that it's running is out of date, is that going to be such a massive problem? I'm just not going to upgrade it myself and it will carry on working. Whereas if you look at something like Apple, where they push it out and they force it out, isn't there a way that they sort of almost like brick your device because it can't get the update and therefore nothing ever works? Or am I maybe hoping that I can carry on using my 2013 Nexus 7 for longer and actually I'm up against a brick wall?
Where to start with all that? I think it's a very naive view that just because you're on your own network, you're not going to suffer from any security vulnerabilities. I mean, fair enough, you'll probably be a little bit better off, but you're still definitely vulnerable. And as for Apple stuff, it's my understanding, having never owned anything apart from a very old iPhone 4 that someone gave me. Well, in fact, that's quite a good example. They force these updates on you, and bricking your old device is a fairly good way to look at it because they force all these new features on you, and then the old device is not really capable of running them well, and so it's really slow and horrible. And I think that's designed to force you to buy another one, planned obsolescence and all that. And then when they do properly abandon it and you don't get the new versions of iOS, then certain apps won't work, some will. It's a bit hit and miss, I think. But as for the Nexus 7, if I were you, I would seriously look to run CyanogenMod or some sort of custom ROM. Dirty Unicorns is one I've been looking into, that sort of thing, because now stock, forget about it, because you're going to stop even getting security updates fairly soon.
Yeah, you say that as if it's going to last forever because you moved over to CyanogenMod. But, my Samsung S3 is really difficult to find modern ROMs for it because it's, 4 years old or something. And so it may well solve the problem in the immediate future, but I don't think it's really a long-term solution. It's a case of, like you said, they're being pushed out the market, new ones are coming in, and you can't keep on producing ROMs for the ever increasing number of devices.
Indeed, yeah. Well, it's the whole problem with ARM that you have to have a specific image for each device, and it's not like normal GNU/Linux where you can have one generic x86 or x86 64 image that will generally work on most hardware. So it's a lot harder for ARM devices to be supported in the long term. So it is a huge problem. And you're right, CyanogenMod isn't going to support it forever with the latest security updates. But I hope that it will support it for a lot longer. But maybe that's just wishful thinking.
And I accept your point that sitting on my home network behind a firewall is a fairly naive view, as if I'm somehow impenetrable. But if you are, using various outside Wi-Fi's and stuff, you can't be so sure when you're on cafes and things like this. However, Google are trying to solve this by allowing Nexus users with Android 5.1 and up to use Wi-Fi Assist, which was in the US and is now being rolled out through Canada, Mexico, UK, and the Nordic countries. And what they've done is somehow looked at a number of these open Wi-Fi networks. They've verified them as fast and reliable, and then allow your phone to automatically connect. So if you're in, I suppose maybe a very busy area of a large city, or a very remote area where signal is difficult to get because you've either got too many people competing with you or not a very good signal, it'll allow you to use these open Wi-Fi networks that Google have given the approval to, and it'll automatically switch over, and you can use that instead of the normal carrier.
Yeah, and as you mentioned there, it is supposed to be relatively secure as well, because they will automatically switch onto a VPN whilst you're using it.
I was going to ask about that because I am very reluctant to connect to any open Wi-Fi. If it's not WPA2, then I'm not interested. So do you think, Paddy, that will actually be secure then?
Well, it should be. I mean, this is Google, and they say to make open Wi-Fi networks safer, Wi-Fi Assistant uses as a virtual private network. The VPN protects your data from being seen by others on the open network, which is very true if that's exactly what they're doing. So the only people who are seeing their traffic are Google.
I set up my home VPN the other day and was went to work, and unfortunately they've blocked VPNs from our Wi-Fi, but connected on my phone through Juice SSH, and then I don't know how, because everyone, I know how they work, I understand what the idea is, but I was then surprised that I could SSH using my local network numbers rather than external IP addresses to SSH onto all my local machines. And it just sort of came as an oddity to be outside my house using my local IPs for SSHing. But there we go. You live and learn.
In this experience, Jesse learns what a VPN is.
Yeah.
Go on then. Let's wrap up the Android news and move on to something more interesting. Before we do, though, one last thing, and that's that Google is bringing in in-app search feature. So it's going to be a local search. It's not going to be using their servers at all. And it'll be able to go foraging through all the applications on your phone eventually and pull out relevant pieces of data. Now, currently, it only works with Gmail, Spotify, and YouTube. But Google say they're working on adding Facebook Messenger, LinkedIn, Evernote, Glide, whatever that is, Todoist, never heard of that one either, and Google Keep as well, which I know no one uses.
So you're talking as if it's somehow in the distant future, as I hold my phone and do a search using the standard Google search bar rather than actually in Chrome, what have you, and just searching for Larry as a random word. Messenger, Gmail, YouTube, Google Play, Facebook, eBay, Instagram, BBC News, Guardian, and IMDb. And they just happen to be the apps that obviously I've got installed. The thing is that it's basically somehow opened those apps, typed the search word in, and returned maybe one or two results. But I don't care about the result of Larry in IMDb, because I've never heard of, Larry the Lion, the film, or whatever it might be, or the first 3 posts of Larry in YouTube. So it's just sort of odd that, I suppose if you were trying to get a quicker way of searching something in YouTube, you could use that, but the amount of other results that you don't want to look at is a little bit unnecessary. If you're looking for a news article on earthquake, for example, you don't want to know what Instagram pictures of earthquake or YouTube videos of how an earthquake occurs. It seems a little bit odd.
Developers seem to have for years this sort of fetish that this is an activity we want to do. I mean, I can remember umpteen of these sort of features appearing on different desktops over the years, where it'll actually go through and trawl your whole PC and try and come back with results. And obviously with Ubuntu Touch, the idea of scopes is kind of going along the same lines here, where you're not actually siloing stuff into applications and you're getting and using data from all over the place. It's the data that's important. And I don't know whether it's just my age, but it doesn't sit very well with me. I'd rather work in siloed apps and know what the hell I'm doing.
Yeah, I must say this doesn't appeal to me at all. And I think you might be right that developers just think that people want this when the reality is they don't. I mean, you've ruined my joke, Paddy. I was going to say I'm waiting for Google to add Amazon results to this search, because that is what it reminds me of, just the useless dash search in Ubuntu. But as long as you don't have to use this, as long as you can still search within apps, then it's just a feature that I'm not going to use. It's not a real problem for me, just a bit of a waste of effort, I think. But let's move on and talk about Paddy's favourite group of people, the European Union and the European Commission, and leaked plans of theirs to bring in some, dodgy rules about the internet, basically. The first of them is that publishers will be forced to use things like Content ID, which is what you get on YouTube, where it automatically scans videos and finds copyrighted content and assigns money to the original copyright holder, even though most of the time it gets it wrong, which is pretty dodgy. But the other one is this idea of news headlines and news content being stolen by the likes of Google. So when you do a Google search for something that's in the news and then click on the news tab, you'll get various sort of a few lines from the beginning of a news story and a link to it. And there's been over the years various claims from news organizations, news publishers, that Google are making money from that and they're stealing their content. And now it looks like the EU and the European Commission are going to force the likes of Google to pay these publishers all throughout Europe, which doesn't seem feasible, really. It just seems like Google will probably just pull out because it's not even worth their time at that point. Because it is fairly valuable to the publishers, I think, because often I will click through and actually read the proper article. Because there's only usually a synopsis of it or the first few lines. So I just don't know. It seems like yet another death rattle from the traditional publishing industry and their cronies in Europe, which makes me sound really anti-Europe, but I'm not. I'm really pro-Europe. So, Paddy, you put this in just to
just to wind
make
you
me
up.
look bad.
Yeah. I mean, you said about them pulling out. I mean, they've done that elsewhere. I think it was Spain that brought something like this in originally, and they just stopped showing these sort of results in Spain. But there's no way on earth they could actually stop providing this service for the whole of Europe. I mean, any threats to pull out would be very much akin to Apple's noises at the moment over the tax dealings with Ireland. Yeah, as you suggested, this is all part of a leaked report when they're looking at rejigging the whole copyright system across Europe. And that's something that Mozilla's got interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. So they've launched a petition to try and reform the copyright laws in the EU, which were written in sort of 2001, so we're 15 years after that. And they're arguing that the way in which those laws were written was sort of based on our behaviours in 2001, which very much paper and that sort of medium. Whereas now we've all got smartphones and we're on the internet a lot more, and there's YouTube posts and Facebooks and Instagram and things that you need to sort of rethink the way in which copyright is used. And so they've set up this petition. Now, I'm not entirely sure that I agree with sort of Mozilla's kind of description as to why this needs to be done. I'm sure there are good reasons, but the way in which they've come across seems a bit odd to me. So they give some examples of where the copyright law looks outdated. So, for example, it's illegal to share a picture of the Eiffel Tower, the display at night on the Eiffel Tower. But I don't think anyone's actually being taken to court for that. It's probably one of those things that's been left in from decades and decades ago, and no one really follows it up. So it's just there is always laws and things that hang over that don't quite get sort of taken out. For example, in some parts of the EU, making a meme is technically unlawful. And again, I'm sure it is, but no one actually follows it up. I just think they're sort of clutching at straws a little bit to make a big song and dance about this. And so what they've sort of said is that, one of their arguments is that technology advances at a rapid pace and the laws can't keep up. And so their suggestion is that we make more laws that will keep up, but they only sort of plan that they will last 5, 10 or 15 years. And it's like, well, the laws we have lasted 15 years. So the plan they have is immediately not future-proof. And I don't understand how they're trying to argue that because technology advances so quickly, the laws aren't keeping up, and the answer is to make laws. It just, I don't know. I see where they're coming from, and I understand that it's outdated, but I don't think that they've really put forward a suggestion that solves the problem.
Yeah, and I thought the blog post and the petition itself was actually pretty unclear. It took me a while sitting and thinking about it to realise they were talking about fair use, really, and the fact that the law is different in different European countries. It's not uniform currently. I'm going to stick a link in the show notes to another article I found elsewhere about where fair use stands across the EU, and I think that's probably a bit more informative than the information that Mozilla's punting out there.
Yeah, exactly. The fair use point, and sorry to ramble on about this, was just they made another statement in that sort of fairly ambiguous post that says, a key part of what makes the internet awesome is the principle of innovation without permission, that anyone, anywhere can create and reach an audience without anyone standing in the way. And that just screams, steal whatever content you want and put it on the web because that's a great thing to do. It just seems to entirely try and ignore the fact that we have these laws and rules in the way to make sure that people who have created content get fairly paid for it. It sort of almost sort of promotes stealing and reusing content. So I'm surprised that it's come out with that sort of tone.
Well, let's move on from a little bit of criticism to some good news, and that is that Facebook is open sourcing Deep Mask, Sharp Mask, and MultipathNet, which apparently are 3 components in their software stack that help identify and contextualize objects within photographs. For instance, determining what objects a photo actually contains, their boundaries, and so on. And I thought this was interesting, as it seems more and more of this sort of behavior is going on. I mean, a little while back, we reported on Google open sourcing the TensorFlow AI platform. And I also saw recently that Baidu have done the same with their deep learning toolkit, which is called Paddle Paddle.
I think it might be time for another cynical sandwich. And that is, yes, it's good that there's more open source code out there, but why are Facebook doing this? It must be to make money, or more likely to stay relevant because everyone else is open sourcing their similar stuff. So they don't want to be left behind. But then again, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. They could be keeping this in-house. They could keep it proprietary and potentially gain an advantage. And maybe they're doing it for the reasons that most people open source things, and that is to benefit everyone else, and also so that other people will work on it and everyone can benefit, including Facebook.
Yeah, and you've got to remember, not all of that is mutually exclusive either. I mean, casting my mind back to the conversation we're having about the Kernel Summit mailing list stuff about GPL enforcement and what have you. And one of Linus's main points on there was that people need to be put in a position where it's in their self-interest to use the GPL and use it appropriately, and for it to actually work for them and for it to be in their self-interest. So good can come out of that.
So taking Joe's point about it being in their self-interest, I agree with that. But I think it's probably because at the moment there seems to be a change in the view of making your software internally within a closed ecosystem with your engineers work in your office, and then using it for your own needs is not producing the results. It's not making that code used by everyone else. This is a terrible way of going about it, but what I'm trying to say is that the idea that they could use their code and it would only get so far because they're only using it for one purpose and by one set of people developing it, if they can release it and get more code, like you said, Joe, or more uses for it and therefore it expands. But in doing that and having it open, it sort of has this mind share with the open source community, and not just with open source, but other sort of big technology companies that might want to use it. So let's say Google have released their their tool, which allows them to find out the information within photos. If that's the only open source alternative that, whether it be hackers and tinkerers or big corporations, can take and improve and feed back to, Google's code is getting better and better and better and will just be the dominant one. It'll just become the de facto. And that's what I feel Facebook are probably worried about as Google becoming the de facto photo recognition software, and they want to be in as a part of it. So you have to throw it out there and allow people to pick it up, and then you've got a competition, which is better for us because it means that you get more bits of software to perhaps have, you know, one niche or another niche, or one will improve and the other one is dragged up as well. So I agree it's probably in their own self-interest, but I think it's because they're worried about another bit of software trampling all over theirs.
Well, either way, it's got to be a good thing, hasn't it? And I never thought I'd say this, but well done, Facebook. So let's briefly mention that Maru OS, the source code, has finally been released for that. We talked to Preetam, the developer of this, back on show 76, and I was very impressed with it. It's a ROM for the Nexus 5, which is AOSP, but you plug it into a screen and a Bluetooth keyboard and mouse, and hey presto, you've got a Debian desktop running in a container. And it's a very promising project, and it's taken him a little while to get the source code out there. I was getting a little bit worried, but all's well that ends well, I suppose. It's out there now, and hopefully it's going to be ported to some other devices and it's going to be worked on. I'm looking forward to seeing this develop and iron out some of the bugs. So hopefully now it's open source that can happen.
Yeah, there's a long list of devices they're looking to make ports for, and I would certainly like to see it appearing on the 2013 Nexus 7.
That'd be nice, wouldn't it? So a story that has been assigned to me for baffling reasons, Paddy, and that is a Reddit post that says, "Warning, Raspbian OS, consider it compromised." Yeah, I wonder why you gave me this one. So the bottom line is that if you go to the Raspberry Pi website and download Raspbian, you've only got a SHA-1 hash for the images, and they're not signed with GPG signatures, which most people don't care about, is the bottom line. The kind of person who's into the Raspberry Pi is probably a maker or an educator, and they don't even know what SHA-1 and MD5 and SHA-256 even is, and they don't know what a GPG signature is. However, there are some people, especially in the Linux community, who do know what that is, and this one person, Canon-C, wrote to the Raspberry Pi and told them about that, and they didn't reply, so he posted it on Reddit, and then someone who claims to be working for the foundation replied, and instead of saying, yeah, actually this is a good point, we should look into it, they said, we don't care about that kind of stuff, it's fine, if you want to use our distro for security stuff, then don't use something else, which seems a little bit well, in keeping really with the fact that they don't really focus on open source and security very much. So I'm not hugely surprised by this, but hopefully they can sort it out.
Yeah, it was really the attitude that grabbed my attention. I mean, SHA-1 attacks got a lot of publicity sort of last October or so in what was dubbed the Shappening at the time, if you remember. Do you not remember that?
I don't remember it being called that. No, that's quite clever.
Yeah, do a Twitter search for the Shappening as a hashtag. The truth is, it's still not straightforward to generate collisions on demand for SHA-1. But it was the response, if that is genuinely a person representing the organisation there, it was how they dealt with the question and the total and abject lack of any concern for security. It just gobsmacked me, to be honest.
Well, this is a distro, isn't it, that has a default username and password of Pi and Raspberry that doesn't prompt you to change it, and then doesn't even have unattended upgrades installed, doesn't tell you anything about doing security updates. You can do them now via a GUI, but you've essentially got a lot of people who are new to Linux. They go and buy a Raspberry Pi, they use Noobs or whatever to get Raspbian installed, connect it to the internet, and just use it for a few months. Meanwhile, vulnerabilities are found in Debian. It doesn't get patched. It's got this default username and password. It's just a recipe for disaster security-wise, because security isn't a big concern of theirs, which is a shame, really, because all it would take is the right person at the foundation who knows what they're doing, and all this could be sorted out. But it's just not their focus, and it's a real shame to me.
Well, from one Raspberry Pi-based story to a similar Raspberry Pi-based story, we had Ryan Sipes on the show previously, who was talking then about Mycroft and the development of that. But as we covered on the last show, he announced on his blog post that he was leaving the Mycroft project, and there was no clear direction of where he was going to go following that. Now, there's been another blog post, and it turns out that he has been re-employed by System 76 as their community manager. So, good news for Ryan, and congratulations. It'd be interesting to see what sort of things he comes up with to sort of bring the community around a hardware project, because I think I'm more used to community managers on software side of things. He does refer in his blog post to the secret lab, and there's definitely an impression there's some new kit coming, and maybe something slightly different from a laptop. So it's very very hush hush, but we'll have to keep an eye on it and see what Ryan comes out with.
If System 76 was a hip-hop group, he would be their hype man, because I think community manager isn't quite right. I mean, he's basically PR, isn't it, that he does? And that he is brilliant at that. He's brilliant at getting out there, and he really hyped up Mycroft, and things went a little bit sour, it seems. And now System 76, manufacturer and seller of Linux laptops, seems to be the perfect fit for him. And I can see that, well, it's working already. We're talking about it. We're basically just advertising System 76 for free on our show. And so it just seems like the perfect marriage to me. I can see that he's going to do very well there, and he's going to increase their sales. And fair enough, good on them all, really, because they are selling Linux laptops, and there aren't many companies doing that. So it seems like a very positive thing to me. I'm very glad that he's found somewhere that he's going to fit in.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And whilst most people have only got good things to say about System 76, the same isn't necessarily true about Purism, who we talked about several times on the show previously, and how they've time and time again failed to deliver on their promises. Now, they've announced the creation of an advisory board, which has some fairly heavy hitters on it, and I think is possibly a PR issue, but how much it's actually going to impact their day-to-day operations, I'm not sure. I mean, the four people they've appointed are Carl Rankin, who's well-known sysadmin and has written several books, Matthew Garrett, who we mentioned earlier in the show, and we all know is a tenacious FOSS advocate and coder, a guy called Aaron Gratifori, who's a security researcher and a pen tester, and Stefano Zacchiroli, who's an Italian academic and computer scientist, and also a former Debian project leader.
What are they doing associating themselves with a company like this? The only hope that I have here is that maybe they can actually turn it around. Maybe rather than them being dragged down, they can drag it up, this company, Purism, and maybe they can actually start delivering on some of their promises and make some free software, compatible hardware, all the way down to the BIOS. Seems unlikely, but you never know. But to continue with a bit more community news, let's hear about UbuCon Europe 2016. We're now joined by Michael Hall, who is Ubuntu Community Manager, and Sajeevan Vijayakumaran, who is an Ubuntu community member and software developer and student. So welcome to the show, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
So you've come on the show to talk about UbuCon Europe 2016. So who's going to go first? What exactly is that?
UbuCon is just like, it's a conference, which is, obviously Ubuntu focused. So it's an Ubuntu conference, so it's UbuCon. The Ubuntu community has different UbuCons in different countries, the biggest one is the one in the US at scale, which is UbuCon Summit. Then there was several other UbuCons like UbuCon LA in Latin America, in Germany and in France. And this year we are doing our first UbuCon Europe, which will be in Germany, in the town of Essen.
And Canonical's role in this is one of a supporting partner. So the UbuCons are all organized by local communities in those countries. So Sujivan's doing the one in Europe. Jose Antonio Rey runs the one in Latin America the past 2 years. The California Loco team ran the one over at scale in Los Angeles. So we provide speakers as much as we can. We provide some financial support where it's needed, and then just helping with logistics. The website, ubucon.org, is something that we host and try and run for these different groups.
Okay, and this is the 10th UbuCon Germany, and it's sort of morphed into UbuCon Europe. What's the difference between what would have been the normal UbuCon for Germany and what is now going to become the UbuCon Europe?
One key point in the German UbuCon was that it was mostly moving around in different parts of Germany. So the first ones was in the west, some in Berlin, and some in the south. So we try to move from area to area to get different people in different areas. And we want to establish the same one for the European countries. So we hope that next year and the year after we have like UbuCon Europe in France or in UK or any other European countries.
I think we've managed to get this far into the conversation without actually mentioning when it is. And the dates are the 18th to the 20th of November this year. And from the look of it, it's very much like OggCamp in the UK, where the first day is a bit of a meet and greet session and people go out for beers and what have you. And then the next 2 days, the actual conference itself. Is that right?
Correct.
And this is something that's going to be different from one UbuCon to the next. So, for example, the UbuCon Summit that we did in LA was co-hosted with Scale, so we kind of followed their calendar a bit. Some others are just one-day events, like the one that we did in Florida a couple of years ago. So it's going to depend on which UbuCon, what the schedule is, but we do try and either match what the local conference is that we're co-hosting with, or this kind of schedule that Sujivon's put together, where you come in the first evening, kind of get to know everybody, and then jump in with the talks the next day.
Yeah, it's a great breadth of talks there as well, Sujivan. Some stuff that'd be fine for complete novices and some fairly in-depth stuff. I mean, is that intentional, and who is the actual audience you're aiming at here?
The audience is mostly like beginners or, like the typical Ubuntu user. Not necessarily Ubuntu developers or system administrators, but we try to focus both. So beginners can join and install Ubuntu if they didn't do it already, or even experts who can compile their own kernel. So we try to get both, but it's mostly consumer or user focused.
And is it just for Ubuntu users? I mean, that would seem to be obvious, but is it for the wider Linux community as well then?
Yeah, I think the big thing is that it's a conference run by Ubuntu users, and so most of the content is naturally going to, if not be Ubuntu specific, at least assume Ubuntu is there. So it's not going to have things that are necessarily only available on Arch. But there's no hard and fast rule that it has to be Ubuntu specific.
That makes a lot of sense. And so is there a particular theme? Is there maybe, with the talks and things, is there sort of something that you're trying to educate the Ubuntu community with? I'm thinking maybe an emphasis on snaps or the phone or something.
There will be some talks specific to that. I'm going to be giving a talk on snaps. I think some other people on my team are also going to be talking about that and running a workshop on it. It's going to vary depending on who the speakers are and where their expertise is.
And so in terms of finances for this, you mentioned a little bit of potential financial support from Canonical. Does it cost anything to get in? And if so, how much?
We don't have a specific price yet because, we have the good opportunities. We only have to pay for the venue for every attendant. So if only 100 people are coming, we only have to pay for those people. But those people get food and drinks, included in the fee. So we're still searching for sponsors. And right now it won't be more than 30 euros for the whole weekend. We hope to get it lower, like 10 or 15 euros. So even students or pupils who live nearby also can come and join us.
And we have a sponsors brochure up on our website on ubucon.org. So if anybody works for a company that might be willing to throw some money towards UbuCon in exchange for some logo and name placement, go over there and you can download it. We've got some reasonably priced packages all the way up to platinum level that will really help us cover most of the expenses there.
So just to give us a bit of background onto the size of this, what sort of numbers have you had at previous UbuCons for Germany, and do you have any idea about projections for UbuCon Europe?
Well, the last years we had mostly like 100 to 150 attendees. This year we hope to get the same people who are coming usually to the German UbuCon and international people, so we hope to get like 200 attendees.
So I don't know how big Essen is, but 200 people seems quite a lot. Is there any accommodation organised for them? Is there a kind of official hotel or anything like that?
We have some information about hotels on our website. There, for example, there's one hotel which is right next to the building.
We've mentioned the talks, and I'm wondering whether or not they'll be streamed, available online or in some fashion.
Right now, we don't have any people who helps us with streaming. So if someone wants to help us streaming or recording all the talks, we are happy, and you can contact us. The details are on the website.
You can also jump into Freenode IRC. I think Sujivan and I are both on the Ubuntu-community-team channel. So you can ping us there. I'm mhall119, and he is SVIJ.
And maybe could you give us a flavour of some of the talks? I know you mentioned snaps there, but what about sort of the headlines or some of the ones that you're maybe going to attend?
So we've got a keynote speaker coming from Canonical. It's the Canonical CEO, Jane Silber, who doesn't do too many keynotes, so it's really neat that she's going down to UbuCon Europe to do that.
So one of the big things that I like about OggCamp is the social track, is the drinking in the evening afterwards. Presumably that must be quite important to UbuCon as well then.
We currently don't have any published plans for the social events yet, but we will have 2 social events on Friday and on Saturday. Because we have talks and workshops on Saturday and Sunday, we plan to do half or full day of social events on Friday.
I must say I'm looking forward to having some proper German beer. It will be my first time in Germany outside of the airport, so...
The good old Einheitsgeburt. Yes. I hear it's good over there. Well, yeah, thank you very much for coming on the show and telling us about this. It sounds very interesting, and I'd like to get over there, but I'm not sure if I'll be able to. But yeah, so ubucon.org is the place to go to find out about this, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, well, yeah, we'll put a link to that in the show notes. So, thanks a lot, guys, and hopefully speak to you again at some point.
Thank you for having us on, and we look forward to seeing everybody at UbuCon.
Ever the digital hipster, Jesse suggested we should look at Fish Shell. I said, you can look at it, Jesse, and tell us why it's so good and try and convince us. So, try and convince us.
Yeah, let me just step off my unicycle and twiddle my moustache hair into an attractive little quiff. So the Fish Shell, it's an alternative to Bash or ZSH or something or other. And let's just go through some of the highlights that I've found while using it for the past month or so. So the first one, which is obvious if you install it and then run it just by typing fish, is that when you type a command which you've already used, ls or cd or sudo or something, it will show you in grey a history of that command. So the most recent subsequent parts of that command that you've used.
Yeah, so I'm getting lsblk suggested.
Yeah, so you've used that command, and what you can do is go up and down, and it will search through all of your history. Now, people who use Bash may well be familiar with Control R, and if you continue tapping Control R, it can search through your history in much the same way. It's just nice, it's straight there in the shell without having to sort of do Control R or go left and right, what have you. So once you've typed in ls and gone up and down to the one that the previous command you've used that you want to use, you just tap right on the keyboard and it auto-fills everything else, and it becomes populated in color. It also works for multiple parts. So if you do, for example, sudo pacman and then press up and down, it will go through all of the super used pacman commands that you might have installed or searched or whatever it might be. And it also it sort of is coloured, which is not new for a shell, but the colour up in the default setup, incorrectly spelt commands are in red. So if you spell Pac-Man with a K and then press space, it will be in red. Suggestions, as I said, if you've typed in the command and then you've got your the suggested history as you go up and down through that history are in grey, so you can tell that that's not been populated in your terminal yet. And if you quote text, that'll be in green. So they're using some fairly bold and different colours to just break down what it is that's going in your terminal.
But hang on, that means all the text in the terminal isn't green anymore and it doesn't look like the Matrix.
There is that. However, we can get on to some of the configurations you can make later on, because that's later in where my notes are, and it would just be too confusing for me to skip it around. So the other thing that it does is flag completion. So I end up using man pages quite a lot, and I always find them a little bit difficult to sort of search through and look for what the simple thing of what I'm trying to do. And what you can do with this is if you type a command, ls space tac, it knows you're going to be adding flags to it. And what you can do is press tab, and it will show you a short section of, I don't want to say popular or alphabetical, because the way that they've set this up is there's a whole load of config files for every single command, or people add a sort of configuration file for all the different commands, and they define what gets shown when you've pressed tab, and it shows you basically the sort of 4 or 5 most popular ones that they've defined of what tac A, tac capital A, tac author might be in a list. And on the right hand side, rather than having this like weird long description that man pages seems to have, which never quite seems to just say what it does, it's got a very simple short 2 or 3 words that just says prints the author, shows hidden files, bang bang bang. And then it also tells you how many more rows of options there are if you want to look at them all. So you've pressed tab to see what the sort of popular options are, and then you press tab again and it shows you this whole list. So it is like a man page, but you can scroll up and down. And then when you pick the one that you want, I think you press tab again, or maybe right, I can't quite remember, and it auto-fills that flag command. So it's quite a nice way of being able to use flags sort of interactively with a man page. That's sort of the best way of putting it.
So that's very much like sort of bro pages then, isn't it?
Oh, that rings a bell, but I can't remember how it works.
Or you just type bro and then, well, you obviously have to install a package, but you type bro and then the name of the command, and it actually has some sensible English explanation there that someone's written for you rather than actually pulling it from the man page.
Why is it called bro? Is it because it's like your bro, it's helping you out?
Yeah.
Fair enough.
It's for programmers, obviously. Sorry, Jesse, I'm dragging you off topic. Get back on.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I've written it down for me to install later. So, I don't need to because I'm using the fish shell. But there's also in the, I know it's the PS1 config file that defines what your prompt looks like. And what they've done by default is they don't use PS1 config files as you do in Bash. It's one of the functions. There's a whole load of functions and variables, things you can set. But so the basic prompt, when you go deeper and deeper into folder structures, it abbreviates the folder you're in to just the first letter. So if you're, SSH'd into another computer and SSH wouldn't work unless you've got a shell installed on it. But let's just go down, you're in your documents folder, you've got work folder, and then there's something else. It'll just be D/W/working folder. And so it abbreviates and contracts the prompt that you have to look at all times. So I know you can do it in Bash. I'm not saying these things are unique to the fish shell, but it's nice the way that they're set up by default. And coming back to the topic of configuration and defaults, there's a web config, so it's fish_config. Type that into the fish terminal, and it brings up a web page, and it's got sort of a bunch of tabs at the top for the colors you might want to use, and you can just basically click on different preset examples of how you might want the colors to look. The prompts, as I was discussing, functions and variables are all the ways that you can set aliases and things like that. They're all defined as functions. The history, so you can actually go through and delete just by clicking on the rows what history items you don't want to see. Bindings and abbreviations are other things I didn't understand and were down the list. So there's a whole load of things that it does, which I'm not saying are entirely unique, but it's really nice when you know, a 10, 15 minute look, and you can quickly see, oh, I can add flags very easily by scrolling through a list. Oh, it auto-populates popular commands. So if you boot up your PC and always go into your documents and you press CD, it will pre-populate documents because that's the most popular one. Press right and you're already there without having to do, I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but, you know, D tab to go into your documents or whatever you. So it's got these nice little options, and it's just quite refreshing from the normal sort of Bash terminal.
Yeah, and obviously that web interface is actually built in, but I've got to give a shout out to the Debian or Ubuntu packager who actually looks after this, because when I tried to install it, it suggested I knock Apache into the system as well, which seems a bit of overkill for a shell, but I declined that offer very kindly and used the built-in one.
So I know you've been tapping away, Joe. What do you think of the fish shell?
I can see its appeal. I can see if you do a lot of stuff in the terminal, then it would be useful. But I just can't see that it is useful enough for me to remember to type fish every time. I mean, I know you've set up your Bash RC to use it by default, but I just can't see me making the effort to do that, really. Control R is good enough for pretty much everything I need. And man page-wise, I just Google it usually. So I don't think I'm going to use it, but that's the question for you. You've been using it for a while. Are you hooked on it now?
Oh yeah, it's been installed across everything and set as the default across everything. The only hiccup is where I use Arch on my main PC and my laptop. In the Arch wiki, they sort of say, look, don't use it as your default shell, because there are scripts and stuff that run assuming you've got Bash. So you have to change the Bash RC to instantly load into fish. And the problem is then when you close that window, it says, are you sure you want to stop this program running? Because it thinks it's running a program, but you're basically just running the fish shell. So it does remind you that it's a little tiny bit of a hack, but at the same time, it's I get over that.
I think that's a big issue, though, isn't it, Jesse? I mean, you have control over all the systems you've got this on. And I think if you work in an environment where you don't have full control over all those systems you're looking after, it's probably not the cleverest thing to mix and match. I mean, for the longest time, I just used the standard Bourne shell because I knew it would be available everywhere. And it took me a long time, and I still try not to use bashisms as much as possible, although I've been sort of suckered a little bit by the associative arrays that they've brought in. And having a sort of default that you know is going to be the same everywhere is really quite important when you're working in that sort of mixed environment.
I mean, you've touched on something which is dear to my heart, and I remember years and years ago I used to use Opera, and what are we going to say, Opera now?
Opera.
No, I always forget.
It's always been Opera. I don't know why you insist on calling it Opera. You're obviously obsessed with her TV show or something.
Because when I used it all those years ago, that was how my brother told me it was pronounced, and that's locked in now. So on that, you could do these clever things with a right click, and you could sort of right click and draw a P for going to your portfolio, or write I can't think of any other web pages, a Y for YouTube, and it would show you like a little sort of trail of your mouse, and it would take that gesture and go to those pages. You could switch, you could sort of swift right and swift left, and it would go forwards and backwards. And I got so used to all these gesture controls. When I then went to work eventually, and when I went to other friends' houses, and they didn't have it all, they didn't have all my shortcuts, they didn't have all the little niceties that I had, I realized that actually getting used to using a very plain browser and extend that to terminals, as we're discussing, actually was more useful, because when you do all these niche things, you forget the sort of how to use it in its purest form, if you see what I mean. So I actually now use very few shortcuts, very few bookmarks, to make sure that I can do it all from scratch in the browser, and not getting sort of hung up on all these sort of clever little hacks and things. So I mean, ultimately, I agree, Paddy. If you're in a multi-user environment, it would be sensible to have one shell everywhere. I'm in the position where I have just my own PCs to mess around with.
Well, it sounds like you're happy with it, Jesse, and I suppose that's all that really matters. On to the feedback then, and first of all, a huge thanks to our new monthly supporters, Vipul Agarwal and Johan Nilsson, and of course to our existing monthly supporters. It's very much appreciated, everyone. Thank you very much. And contact details. You can email us at show@linuxluddites.com. Or if you go to the website, you'll find links to the Twitter, which is at Linux Luddites, or the Google Plus and Facebook communities. And you can always leave a comment on the website.
Aren't you forgetting somewhere?
Oh, you're obsessed with this gab.ai thing, Paddy. No one is on there. No one cares.
People are appearing. There are Linux users there now. Yeah, it's fairly new sort of Twitter clone, and it did start out as a bit of an echo chamber for the alt-right a couple of weeks back. But it is broadening out nicely, and there are plenty of left-wing folks there now. And as I say, a surprising number of Linux users are making an appearance. So it's possibly worth checking out.
Are you trying to get a job as community manager for Gab?
He is pretty prolific, isn't he?
Yeah. For someone who doesn't really like social media, you're really getting on board with them. So it's what? gab.ai/Linux Luddites if you're on there. I don't know. We'll see. I don't have much faith in anything that doesn't have a .com, quite frankly, but you seem to disagree, Paddy. So yes, find us on there if you fancy it.
So top of the feedback, Will got in touch, talking about some of the hardware hacking of Bluetooth front door locks and things, saying, having obviously poor security should not be tolerated, but I wonder how secure a smart lock really needs to be comparable to a physical lock. Some of the security flaws in that article require fairly targeted attacks, and if someone really wanted to get into a house, they could just break through the window instead. Now, he does goes on to talk about Lumina, but before we do, there was an article in the news in the last week or so about the topic that we talked on, where a whole bunch of these locks got hacked, and one of the manufacturers, August, recently came out and updated their software to try and remedy that. And I ended up looking at the August webpage and was sort of a little bit sold on the idea of having one of these awesome security locks, which I know is 2 weeks. 2 weeks is a long time in my mind, and I think it's because Will's point. I mean, on my front door, I have a standard Yale lock and a deadlock, and it's a wooden door with a single pane of glass, like a foot square. It is not beyond the wit of man to smash that door down if you wanted to get in, or maybe I would leave the back door open, or there's a whole host of things that are ways in which I am not as secure as if someone hacked my lock. And I just sort of think, if someone really wanted to get in, as Will says, is that the most the weakest point?
Well, I think it's a reasonably good point, but smashing a window is very conspicuous. Whereas if you can just have an Arduino and press a few buttons and then it just pops open and you walk in like you own the place, you're less likely to attract attention. So if I was going to break into somewhere, I'd much prefer to do it that way than smashing a window. But the point does stand. If they really want to get in, they're going to get in.
And the other thing that I noticed was that for some reason I had thought you replace your whole lock, and so it's got like a big blue flashing light on the outside that says, look how technology advanced I am. But no, it's just the inside. So the outside looks exactly the same. So there's no way of knowing, apart from the fact that you're walking up and you're not having to get a key out to get into your house. There's no way of knowing that you've got one of those Bluetooth locks. But anyway, as I said, Will carried on and to talk about the Lumina desktop. And he said, on the BSD Now podcast, the developer of Lumina said that having a BSD-centric desktop environment was one of his main motivations. Licensing might have been part of it, but I think just having better integration into the OS compared to porting over a Linux-focused desktop was more important to him.
Yeah, and Florian continued in a similar vein and said, I got the impression from Ken, and that's Ken Moore he's talking about, an important part of Lumina is to have a native desktop environment without any Linuxisms. Or, probably even more importantly, any dependencies on Systemd which other OSs have to work around.
So we did sort of slate Lumina a bit, or at least Joe and I did, not being impressed with how it looked and how it fundamentally worked. But maybe, it has a better time on BSD, and they've got to, it was 1.0, wasn't it? So it could perhaps build on that from now, I guess.
Yeah, it's easy to criticize things, but understanding a bit more of the motivations behind it, I can think, yeah, fair enough, but just don't call it 1.0, call it 0.1.
No, I think you're being harsh there. But anyway, let's hear from Cubicle Nate, who also had some words about Lumina. And he said, I tried out Lumina on OpenSUSE Leap, and I agree that it isn't ready for mainstream. But it is off to what I think is a good start. Obviously, there are some UI issues, but looking aside from that, I do like their approach. So I don't believe it to be a wasted effort or just another desktop environment. The one thing I would like for the developers to do would be to use Dolphin as the file manager instead. I also hope that the work they do with Lumina helps to continue the development and refinement of Qt. For my main machine, it probably wouldn't replace my daily driver of KDE, as I like all the things that KDE does for me. Well, what KDE does to you, I think is the expression, but never mind. Cubicle Nate finishes by saying, for an older, less capable system, this could compete with LXQt.
Well, that seems to be where it's pitched as an alternative to LXQt, doesn't it? Or certainly on the level with that. And maybe LXQt is too Linuxy, and so on a BSD, you'd be more likely to lean towards Lumina. But LXQt does feel far more advanced to me. Even though I don't particularly like it, it does seem far closer to being ready for the mainstream.
Yeah, I just couldn't disagree more with the idea of having Dolphin as your default file manager. Every time we review KDE and I flash that up, I think, oh, what are they playing at? It just grinds my eyes somehow. I just don't get on with Dolphin. So not getting my +1 Cubicle Nate.
It does have a lot of features though, Dolphin. I don't particularly like it. I don't like Qt generally. I don't know what's wrong with me, but there you go. But it does have a lot of features. I hear it's got a lot of fancy network file system stuff, and I can see why people use it, but it's just not for me.
Well, switching from our review of Lumina on the last show to Joe's review of Gallium OS, Kelly Price got in touch and said, I'm glad you reviewed Gallium OS. I have an Acer C710, which is a rare beast of a Chromebook, having an actual hard drive and upgradable RAM. I switched to Gallium OS on it, upgraded the RAM to 16 gig, and swapped out the HD for an SSD. Now, just pausing there, 16 gig in a Chromebook. I don't have 16 gig in any of my machines here. That's an almighty upgrade.
Yeah, now I've run out of RAM on my 2 gigabyte Chromebook, and the processor's fairly capable, but 16 gigabytes seems massive overkill to me, unless you're running a lot of Chrome tabs or something.
Anyway, Kelly continues to say, and as you said, Gallium OS is looking quite good. I've had to add most of XFC back, but given that you have to spend a little time to configure new things how you like them, I've grown accustomed to that. As long as it doesn't take 2 whole weeks. I'm looking at you, Windows Vista. Also, the Gallium OS subreddit actually has a good support base, and the developers behind it pitch in as well. I linked to a thread to the episode, and one of the devs noted that there is a fix for the right mouse click button that they want to put in the wiki, and some discussion about F11 and F12.
Yeah, I noticed the link from Reddit, so thanks a lot for that. And I do need to look into this right-click business, and F11 and F12, that sounds very useful as well. So I should spend a bit more time looking at that.
Well, let's change tack and wrap things up with a comment from Ian Barton. And Ian got in touch and said, just wondered if you're aware of Sandstorm.io. I've only just discovered it and managed to install it on a DigitalOcean droplet as a self-contained private system. There is lots of interesting stuff, and at first glance it seems far in advance of Own and Nextcloud system. I haven't gone into its security setup in great depth yet, but this seems to be one of their USPs.
I certainly hadn't heard of Sandstorm.io. Is it on your radar, Paddy?
It wasn't. I've had a look now, and I've got to say, it looks nice. I mean, how it is technically behind the scenes, I don't know, because I've not had a chance to poke around at it, but it certainly looks good.
Yeah, so I'm currently sort of in the process of trying to work out how I want to do my self-hosting, and I just feel that maybe OwnCloud or Nextcloud is a bit too much. It's got all these other applications you can have, and you can have calendars and things like this. And Sandstorm is like OwnCloud or Nextcloud on steroids. There are, well, I don't want to say hundreds, but certainly tens of apps that you can add to it for having all sorts of things. You know, they've got their own sort of key pass. I think it's called SandPass, and they've got all sorts of additives for galleries or emails, and as I said, you know, CloudAV servers and all these sorts of things. The same as what OwnCloud and Nextcloud have. There's almost too much. I'm sure if you wanted to use it and deploy it on a company-wide sort of infrastructure, you would make use of all those different applications. But I'm sort of looking at something a lot smaller, and so I started off looking at C-File. So it's not something that I think we're going to look at. Certainly, I'm not going to look at from my own point of view. Maybe when we next review Nextcloud or OwnCloud or something that has a similar sort of competitive sort of leaning, then it may all be one that we come to.
Yeah, I think that's probably the right approach. I mean, I like C-File. I've talked about this before. I think it gets a bad press simply because of where it comes from. So I'm pleased that you're enjoying it too.
Well, I have a community question, if I could throw it out there. The problem I have is that because of the way C-File stores the information in a block file storage, you can't just point it at the drive that you want to share and say, make all this available. You have to almost like feed it into the front end for it to save it in its own clever saving methodology. And then you can't read any of that. So I've not used it to its fullest because I don't want to have access to the files via SSH on my server that I want, and then have to save them through C-File using its block storage, which you can't read from a command line. So I'm just wondering if anyone else uses C-File out there and has worked out how to get around this problem. So you only have one copy in a way that you can read on your hard disk, from an SSH session.
Yeah, I seem to remember there was a Fuse add-on for it, wasn't there?
I have tried, and it's not gone particularly successfully. So I'm not so sure that's... maybe I need to go back to it and have another look.
Okay, well, we'll toss it out to the audience, and if people have got good experiences and can tell us how they've set things up, then we'd love to hear from you. But that'll do it for the feedback. Let's move on.
One of the things that I remember most about switching to Linux was that suddenly I could change the theme really easily. Because in Windows, you were pretty much stuck with one or two looks, and you could hack it to make it look different, but otherwise you were pretty much stuck with defaults. Whereas in Linux, you had all these different themes. I remember there was a purpley looking one that was terrible, and this was back in the GNOME 2 days. And so, Paddy, you have been thinking a little bit about this lately, haven't you? And you looked at Chalet OS, which is a Ubuntu-based distro that looks quite a lot like Windows, but has got a theming and style changer that gives you a lot of different options there. And we also talked about Zorin OS recently. I think there was an Italian government department that had switched to it. And that's a very Windows-looking distro, I think, based on KDE. And I get the feeling, Paddy, you're not massively in favor of all of this desktop customization. You think it could be harmful to Linux?
I don't think it could be. I think it is harmful to Linux. You mentioned Zorin there, and one of the reasons they went for that was because they could make it look like Windows. Now, even if you don't want an operating system to look like Windows out of the box, it certainly helps migration, and it was the familiarity aspect they really liked when they decided to go that route over there. And you mentioned Chalet as well, and that's taken an interesting approach because even though it's based on XFCE, as you mentioned, and you can go into XFCE settings and configure things exactly as you would the desktop I'm sat looking at, it comes with a theme changer, which does some very basic things like changing the colour of your window title bars and stuff like that, but in a very straightforward way and not offering you a lot of options. And I think potentially the opportunity to have all this fiddling about means that's what we spend time doing, fiddling about. And it kind of goes back also to what Jesse was talking about with Fish. And if everyone's computer's different, how on earth are you going to provide support to them? You can't say, click on this button here and it will look like this and provide documentation for that, when their desktop is probably going to look totally different.
But the changes are all fairly superficial. Like you said, there's in Chalet OS, there's a theme change that allows you to change whether the window border is orange or blue, whether the background has a general tint. They're sort of quite quite superficial. So even though you can change the icons and change the look of everything, it all works the same. The options are still in the same place. One of the biggest benefits of using Linux is that people who share commands, terminal commands to solve problems, that is going to work across most distros. Obviously, there are nuances here and there, but you can be fairly sure that config files and things should be in the same place. And perhaps the people who are messing around with how their PC looks are those people who are able to deal with it and remedy it should it sort of fall apart. I mean, if you really want to personalize it, you'll probably go with something like Fluxbox to get a very kind of raw start, and then you just go crazy. And some of the most wild themes that you see if you do a Google search for Linux themes are based on Fluxbox or some sort of other open box. So I sort of wonder whether having a couple of little color changes is really, is that really changing the paradigm that much?
Well, that's what I think as well, that essentially what we're talking about is more the UI end of things here. Whereas as long as the UX is the same, as long as the experience that you have, as long as things are in the same place and act the same, then I don't see a problem. If it's a slightly different shade of grey or even a completely different colour, things act the same way, and therefore I don't think that people are going to have a problem adapting to it. And again, if you've got two completely different themes, I mean, I think about Raspbian, we mentioned that in the news, and RockOS, which is another distro based on Raspbian. It's all LXDE, and RockOS is much more modern looking, new mix icons, looks really great. Raspbian, not so much. But you could easily describe to someone over the phone how to use one or the other if you had the other one in front of you, if you know what I mean, because they act exactly the same way, even though they look different. So I don't think the aesthetics that we're talking about here matter as much as you think, Paddy.
Unless what your issue is, I mean, ignoring the theme changer within Chalet OS, ignoring the theme changer within Zorin that makes it look like Windows XP or Windows 7 or KDE, are you saying the fundamental difference in look between those two distributions is so big that that's going to cause a problem? So not necessarily the theme changer within the distribution, but the different distributions.
Yeah, I think there's two issues here. There's that one that you've just picked up on. So individual distros can look totally different. And there's also just the sheer configurability and the fact that we enjoy having that sheer configurability and spend so much time messing around with themes, downloading new icon packs, changing stuff, as opposed to using the computers for work.
Yeah, but as I said at the top of this, you can do that stuff in Windows. You can download icon packs. You can do all sorts of customization. And there are people who do that. And in Linux, okay, it might be a little bit easier to do that, but I know a lot of people, especially the people who have never used it before, who I've set it up for them, they've never ever gone into the settings and changed any of that stuff. They've just got on with what they need to do, whether that's looking at Facebook or YouTube or whatever it is they happen to be doing. So I think that tinkerers going to tinker and normal people are not. So for me, it's far more about the defaults. And I think that defaults matter a great deal. And if it looks horrible out of the box, then it's going to put people off. They're not going to go in and change things. Whereas if it looks nice out of the box, they're just going to leave it and potentially keep using it.
Yeah, it does come a little bit back to the point where we were talking, or I was talking about using Opera back in the day, and it had all these sort of clever mouse clicks and mouse gestures and things. And I tried to leave those things default, and it sort of has sort of crept through now. So, I mean, I'm running Antigros, and it's a fairly, I've left the icons the same. I've just chosen one of their default wallpapers. The way the menu bar is on the left, and all these sorts of things. I've left it all the same. I've got used to it. It means that when I install that on my laptop and potentially, another laptop or whatever I've got, and it just boots up, I'll be entirely familiar with it. And I did definitely go through a period of tinkering, and everyone's looked at blooming spinning desktop cubes and swishy windows and all these sorts of things. A bit of compiz never hurt anyone. But maybe I've just grown out of that and now think, if I reinstall this and I've spent a day messing around with all the config files, and then when I reinstall it, it's like, I'm now back to square one. If I'm happy with square one, I just leave it there.
Yeah, I guess it comes back to the old question of why we use this operating system in the first place and who else we would like using it. And a lot of us treat it, in some regards, like you would a kit car, and we're all enthusiasts and we like fiddling about under the hood and actually making it quite unique, our own experience. Equally, a lot of us actually do this for a living and have to work with other people who have certain expectations. And it's just the continual jarring of those two different paradigms, if you like, that got my thought processes running here, even though you're shooting me down.
Well, I think that one of the good things about Linux is that you can do all that stuff if you want to. And so I would never take it away. I would make it perhaps a little bit less obvious than a big icon on the desktop saying theme changer. Bury it in a menu somewhere so that people have to go looking for it. But I think that trying to take that choice away has one logical conclusion: unity. And nobody likes that, do they? Troll, troll, troll. But we certainly don't like it. And one of the things I hate most about Unity is the lack of customization, because I want to make things how I like them. And that's one of the many, many reasons that I use Linux.
It's funny, I was thinking about Unity as one of you two were talking, going through the different desktops in my head. And if you ever see anyone posting things online from Linux, it's very often Ubuntu, because it does have the largest market share, and they always look the same. There is consistency there. You're not going to get purple icons. You're not going to get all sorts of the menu, which is on the left, the permanent menu bar. Has only just been allowed, but they've incorporated the code to put it on the bottom or the right, possibly even. I'm not quite sure, but it's like you say, Joe. It's very locked down, and therefore you get the consistency. And maybe that is part of why it's popular. I mean, I know Ubuntu was popular to start with. I know there was that whole sort of issue when Unity was first launched, but they have stuck with it. People, I think, are going back to it because the various bugs or oddities have been ironed out, and they've improved the workflow. And now it, like I say, it is always consistent when you see posts online. And so actually, maybe that has worked in their favor. This is the argument I think Paddy's putting across, is having something which doesn't chop and change and look different all the time. It means that you just pick it up and you go. So is that I don't want to take the words and spin your words, Paddy. Is that sort of where you were thinking?
Yeah, I was coming at this from several different angles, and that's certainly one of them. I mean, for the Ubuntu brand, for Canonical actually branding and getting recognition in the marketplace, I think it's been immensely successful, even though we don't like Unity, the three of us, and we wouldn't choose to use it. A lot of people out there do, and they use it in the state it comes out of the box because it's so difficult to change that.
Yeah, I mean, if you are watching TV and, it sort of pans through an office and you see that left-hand bar with the icons on it, it is so obvious. It stands out so clearly to the trained eye, or the Linux eye, let's say, that you know straight away they're running Linux, and you're happy to have seen it on TV. Yeah, if they were running one of the many XFCE distros, LXQT, I suppose there must be twists on GNOME and things like this. You don't get that sort of standout recognition, because you sort of have to go, oh, is that GNOME with a funny shell on it? Is that Cinnamon, and someone has changed the icons from something, and you just have to sort of start scratching your head. So I from a corporate point of view, from Canonical's point of view, having had this conversation, I can sort of see where you're coming from, Paddy. It's good for them to have I don't want to say conformity, but consistency in the way they're producing not only their desktop environment, but the phone and the tablet versions as well.
Yeah, and it's not just Canonical either. I mean, you mentioned GNOME there, and if you think back to when GNOME 3 first kicked off, I mean, they were so anti anyone fiddling about with the look and feel of it, and they refused to have extensions, even though it was set up to enable extensions from day one. They didn't want extensions. They didn't want to encourage that. And there was a huge argument at the time about people customizing it. They wanted the look and feel to be how they wanted it to be. And again, that was from a branding perspective. Plus, they obviously thought they knew best about how people operate.
But that's the brilliant thing about Linux. I keep coming back to it. Choice. Either you can choose to use a desktop environment or a distro that gives you loads of choice and you can tinker with it and make it exactly how you want, or you can choose to use something that gives you no choice and you're basically stuck using it as is.
Yeah, but I guess one of my propositions would be that it's only by removal of choice that you get that brand awareness, and it's the brand awareness you need to gain market share. And if we care about Linux on the desktop, then that choice has got to be removed.
Let me put a hypothetical to you, Paddy. Would you agree that XFCE installed out the box is fairly unattractive?
Absolutely, yes. I think I may have mentioned it last show. It looks about as ugly as Lumina does.
So let's say Ubuntu decided that actually tinkering around with that was a waste of time. We're just going to have the Ubuntu base, put stock XFCE on top of it, and ship that. Would you take the time to try and improve the look of it to what you have now, or would you jump ship to an XFCE version which is pre-configured to look nice?
I would configure it because I've done exactly that on Debian before when I used to run Debian. But I'm not a typical user. Well, I guess this is where the dichotomy is, isn't it? Because a lot of people listening to this show are like me and you and Joe, and we're not typical Office drone users, if you like. And my pitch here is that the people who are listening to this show and who like to tinker are actually a very small proportion of potential computer users out there. And if we've got any interest in getting more Linux computers sat in front of people, we need to address that market rather than the market we're looking at the moment, which is us.
Well, that's exactly what Canonical have been doing with Ubuntu, surely.
Absolutely. And they've done it by, as we've discussed, taking away configuration options or making it very difficult to configure things and giving people a unified experience, which is something you've been arguing against.
Yeah, but Joe is of the as long as I'm happy, everything's fine sort of view.
Yeah, as long as I've got Ubuntu and it's working fine, anyone else can do what they like. I don't care, really. But you look at something like Ubuntu Mate, and there is a lot of choice. You can make that look quite Mac-ish. You can make it look quite Windows-ish. You can make it look quite Linux-ish. Traditional GNOME too. And that is aiming at those very same people that you're talking about, Paddy, except for people who are unwilling to change to a new way of doing things. And I think that as long as the default is sensible and looks good, that's all that matters. I think that most people are not going to attempt to change it. So if you want to be successful, make something that looks good and acts like it should out of the box, because the out-of-the-box experience is by far the most important thing here. But with that, we're coming to the end of another Linux Luddites. You can email us at show@linuxluddites.com. Find us on Twitter and Gab at Linux Luddites. You've snuck it in there as well, Paddy. The Google Plus and Facebook communities, or leave a comment on the website. Thanks for joining me, Paddy and Jesse, and thanks to everyone for listening. We'll see you again in 2 weeks with more Linux news, reviews, comment, and generally being grumpy.
Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, chartered engineers.
See you later. What?
I got my chartership through the post last week.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Does that mean you get more spondulage?
It does not, unfortunately.